We are Life Church Livonia.
So this is what I've come to realize, that if I had been born in 1923 instead of 1973, that my life would have been considered highly unusual, even in some ways remarkable. And so as I've thought about my life, and I was born and raised in Kansas, I went to college in Chicago. I began my kind of vocational ministry journey in Colorado, and that's also where I met my bride and where I got married. My children have all been born in different states and even in different time zones. I have served or attended 7 different churches in my life in 5 different time zones, which is mind-boggling. And I've traveled around the world and visited at least 11 countries. And if I'd been born in 1923 instead of 1973, my life might have been turned into a book. But I wasn't. I was born in 73, and because of that, my life is normal. I am the typical human being. I am representative of the vast majority of Americans who've traveled widely, who've moved. And the statistics tell us that at least 15% of people in America have stories very similar to mine. And 63% of people in America have moved away from home at some point in their life. Moved completely away from what they called home, what felt like home, where their heart said was home. And so what that's done for Americans, for many Americans, is it's left them in a space where they're asking the question, where is home? Where is the place that just feels like home? We say home is where the heart is, and so the question begins to be, well, where is that? Where is our home? I've had trouble answering that question for years because of how many places we've lived and how invested we get in each of those places. But if home is where the heart is, then the study that I was looking at said that almost a quarter of U.S.-born adults, almost 25% of the people around you would say that where they're living right now isn't where their heart is. So if that's the case, if almost 25% of us are living in a place where we wouldn't even consider this the place we would want to be, then how do we invest deeply? How do we commit ourselves to the community, commit ourselves to relationships, and commit ourselves to the work that God is doing in our midst if we don't even feel like this is the place where we want to be? I've lived in places that I would have wanted to live there for the rest of my life. They were fabulous, they were easy to enjoy, and I've lived in places where I was miserable. But here is what I believe God has been teaching me as I've moved. Here's what God has been pressing into me for the last few decades, really. As he's trying to grow me into being the man that he calls me to be, he's been teaching me this, that I am called to love where I live, no matter where I live. That I'm called to love where I live, no matter where it is that I find myself. And this isn't just about falling in love with a region of the country or a specific city or a particular home that matches all of the criteria you have for the perfect place to live. It's not simply about what friend group you find yourself in, or even if you've found a friend group yet. It's not about that. This calling to love where I live, no matter where I live, is an invitation from God to respond to his love to me by extending that love to the people that I find around me, no matter where I am. No matter whether the people around me speak my language or not, whether they are the same culture as me or the same color as me or the same background as me or the same age as me. God says, I want you to take the love that I poured into you and turn around and pour it back out. And if you are a follower of God, If you are a Christian, if you claim Christ, then you are his beloved child. And as such, he says to you the same thing he says to me. Love the place you live with the love that I have given you. He says, I want you to leverage the temporary for the sake of the eternal. I want you to leverage the time, the resources, the abilities, the gifts, the love, the grace that I've given to you. I want you to leverage that on my behalf for the people in the communities around you. God wants us to realize that every place is temporary. And he wants us to plug in and serve and love and care deeply no matter where we find ourselves. And in concept, it seems simple. If this was a math problem, it would be simple. 5 plus 5 equals 10. A plus B equals C. But life isn't math. It's not as simple as that. And so regardless of whether the community that you find yourself in right now is the dream community, regardless of whether Livonia, you can't imagine living anywhere else, which is true for a lot of people. Or if you're here and maybe you live in Livonia, or maybe you live in one of the surrounding communities and you're like, not so much. I would like to be anywhere else besides here, maybe some of you are thinking, because your family is away or your dream job is away or whatever it might be. Whether this is your favorite place you've ever lived or your least favorite, God wants you to love where you live, and God wants you to live a sent life. A sent life. To live as if each moment matters. I want to help kind of unpack, what does it mean to live a sent life? And at the beginning, what that really means is that God's plan from the beginning, his plan A, has always included us. God's plan A has always included his people because he is a sending God. A God that raises up a people, that invests in a people and then sends them out. God has always wanted his people to paint a picture of himself for the people around them. And the way they paint that picture isn't with a canvas and a brush. They paint a picture of who God is for all of the people around them with their lives. That your life paints a picture of who God is for everyone around you. And here's a humbling truth that I've been thinking through over the last few weeks, and even as I speak today, it's true that our lives tell people more about God than my sermons do. Okay, think about that. Our lives tell people more about God than any sermon that I will ever preach. And I want you to know that I work really hard to do this well. I want to bring my best to you every single Sunday. I pray that the words of my mouth, the meditations of my heart would be pleasing to God, would be acceptable to him, that people's lives would be impacted deeply, that I would paint a picture for you with my words that help you connect more deeply to God and remove the barriers between you and God. But ultimately, your lives, my life, tell people more about God than my sermons ever will. And I can feel bad about that, but actually I don't at all, because that's the way God designed it to be. And not only do I not feel bad about it, but I actually find myself in good company, because the same thing was true about Jesus' sermons. This is the truth, that there were far more first century followers of Jesus who had never heard a sermon that he preached than people who had heard one. We don't see a lot of sermons being preached by Jesus. We see a lot of life being lived and people's lives being impacted because of that life he lived. We see the majority of the first century followers of Jesus occurring after he had already died and ascended to heaven. More people's lives were impacted by the way Jesus did life and the way that his disciples did life after his death than any sermon that he would ever preach. It's why in John chapter 20, verse 21, he's already been crucified. He's already risen from the dead, and he's appearing to his disciples. And in one of those moments, in John 20, 21, this is what he says. Jesus said, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you." We are a sent people. The disciples were a sent people. God has always been sending people because he wants our lives to paint a picture for the whole world to see about who he is. This is how people come to know Christ with the most regularity. It's because of who we are and what we do. It's also the reason why people run from the church. It's because sometimes of who we are and what we do. Our lives matter. And in this moment, Jesus sits with his disciples and he says, "As the Father has sent me, so I am sending you." And he was sending them with the hope of the gospel, of the good news. He was sending them into the synagogues and into the workshops. He was sending them into the marketplaces and into the meadows where they raise sheep and goats. He was sending them back to their homes even. And some of these disciples were saying, "Well, we don't even have a home anymore, Jesus. We left our homes to follow you." And he's like, "I know. Every place you go, make it your home. Every place you find yourself, bring me. Every place you go, I want you to love where you live." Jesus modeled this kind of life. Jesus modeled a sent life for them. You see it all throughout the Gospels, that everywhere that Jesus went, he was fully present. He gave each community that he engaged with his full attention and his full heart. He was never too busy to extend a kind word, to extend a healing hand, to extend a loving touch. This was Jesus, because Jesus loved wherever he lived and invites you and I to do the same. He said to his disciples, "As the Father has sent me, so I am sending you." And that command, that call, that invitation is still being spoken over us today. It's still being spoken over you and I today. If you call yourself a follower of Jesus, this is our calling as the beloved sons and daughters of the Most High God. It's beautiful. And to step fully into the plan that God has for your life, this is what we have to do. I love what Henry Nouwen says about this, about the sent life. He says, "Your family and your friends, your colleagues and your competitors, and all the people you may meet on your journey through life are all searching for more than survival. Your presence among them as the one who is sent will allow them to catch a glimpse of real life." I love that line. Your presence among them as the one who is sent will allow them to catch a glimpse of real life. At the core of who we are at Life Church Livonia, we say that Jesus came to give life and give it to the full. Some translations say he came that we might have life abundant. That means that life and love and joy and hope that fills us up to the top and pours out from us. And Henry Nouwen is saying, when we live a sent life, the people around us get a glimpse of that life, of that hope, of that grace, of that mercy. When we live a sent life, people get a glimpse of God in us. If we love where we live. If we love the space where we're at with the love that God has given us. It does more than just give people a glimpse sometimes. Sometimes it actually becomes an invitation and people step fully in. Numerous people over the last month or so have found God here in our midst. Numerous people who were far from God have taken a huge leap of faith and stepped into the arms of God, into a relationship with God through Jesus Christ because of the ministry that happens at this church. And I will tell you, it's not because of my sermons. They certainly play a role, but you play a huge role in that through your invitational ability, through the way that you reach out to your neighbors and your friends and your colleagues, the way that you invite people, the way you greet them at the door and love their kids back in Life Kids, the way that you help them find a seat and engage them during our greeting time. All of that adds up to a community of faith that is living sent, and people are meeting God as a result of that. The love of God is filling us up, and we're pouring it out. There's a really interesting kind of interchange between Jesus and one of his disciples just one chapter later. After he said to them, I'm sending you, he has a conversation with Peter. And this is what he says. John 21. Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these do? And he replied, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And Jesus told him, feed my lambs. And Jesus said a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he replied, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And Jesus told him, shepherd my sheep. And then Jesus asks him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter is starting to get frustrated. He's like, Lord, you know I love you. You already asked me twice. I think I've showed it in my life. And Jesus goes on to have a dialogue with him. And at the very end of that dialogue, he says to him, follow me. Simon, son of John, do you love me? Follow me. That's all I'm asking, he says. Do you love me? Say yes to me. Follow me. Come after me. Do what I do. What does it look like to follow someone who is no longer walking on this earth? Because that's what Peter had to wrestle with. Because shortly after that, Jesus ascends to heaven. He's gone. There is no way that Peter can continue to physically follow Jesus. And yet he was still called to follow Jesus. What does it mean to follow someone? Following someone means that you go where they would have gone. It means that you care for those that they would have cared for. Following someone means that you speak out what they would have spoken to people, whether it be a word of love or it be a word of correction. It means that you engage the conversations that Jesus would have had. It means that you don't walk by the people that Jesus wouldn't have walked by. It means that you love the way that he would have loved, and you love the people that he would have loved. Jesus lived a sent life, a life filled with love, and invites you and I to do the same. And the only way we can do that is if we make a decision to follow him and to love people where we live. I love what Shauna Pilgrim says about a sent life. These words are inspirational to me. I hope they are for you. She says, choosing to live sent is moving towards something, not away from something, and leads to an attachment to your community. Living sent is the strategy of loving people well in your town whom you are sent to love, and then watching God connect the dots. Living sent is for those who are called to stay in their childhood places and for those who must cross oceans. Living sent is for those who want to move and those who have to move, for those who want to stay and those who have to stay. She goes on and says, doing what you were created to do in your current season of life, in the place where you live, this is living sent. To live like you're supposed to be there, not like you're just passing through. This is inspiring to me. And as we think about it and we begin to kind of put the dots together, we realize that there's parts of this that are fairly simple. If you're filled up with God's love and you're surrounded by people that you already love, that you already know, that you already feel comfortable with, this is fairly easy to live out. If you're filled up with God's love to the fullest measure and you're in a community where you already love the community, where you're already plugged into the community, where you're already connected to the people in your neighborhood, this is somewhat easy to live out. But what if you're not? What if you find yourself right now in a tough situation? What if you're in a tough place at work, or a tough place in your marriage, or a tough place in your parenting? What if you live here in Metro Detroit somewhere and you have no desire to live here in Metro Detroit right now? What if you're currently living in Farmington and what you'd love to do is live near your family downriver? Or you live in Novi and you want to be closer to your job because it's in downtown Detroit, and so you wish you lived somewhere closer so you didn't have to fight traffic. What if the place you find yourself in is tough because of what's going on with your body medically or your relationships emotionally? How do we live a sent life? How do we love where we live if we find ourselves in a tough situation? Where not only are we feeling far away from home, but we might even be feeling far away from where God is moving. How do we live a sent life in those situations? And I believe we turn to the words of the prophet Jeremiah. And he wrote these words in Jeremiah 29 to a people that were in exile. They had been carried off into exile to Babylon because of their disobedience. Because they had lived their lives in a way that was contrary to what God had called them to do and who God had called them to be. And as a result of that, now they found themselves in a really tough place where they'd been taken away from home, away from everything that they knew, everything that they loved, their jobs, their everything stripped away. In some cases, families torn apart where some people remain behind and other people are carried off into exile. And the goal of people carried off into exile was to rid you of everything that made you you. They wanted to rob you of your culture and rob you of your language and rob you of your close family ties because they wanted you to be an enslaved people. They were in a place where it would have been really difficult to love where you live. They were in a place where it would have been really easy to look around and say, there's no way that I'm called to be a sent one in this place. And yet, listen to what Jeremiah says. The Lord God of Israel, who rules over all, says to all those he sent into exile to Babylon from Jerusalem. So pausing there, listen, this is God's word. The Lord is speaking directly to his people. And this is what he tells them to do. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and allow your daughters to get married so that they too can have sons and daughters. Grow in number. Do not dwindle away. Work to see that the city where I sent you as exiles enjoys peace and prosperity. Pray to the Lord for that place, for as it prospers, you will prosper. This is profound. He says to the Israelites, I know that you are in a desperate, hard place. I know you don't want to be where you are at right now, but I want you to know that you are called to flourish in that place, that even in that space, you are still a sent one. Even in that place, I'm calling you, don't dwindle away. And we can look at that and say, well, when he says don't dwindle away, he's simply talking about the population. But I want to speak directly to you and I in the ways that we dwindle away. The ways that we withdraw and shrivel up emotionally and relationally and spiritually when we don't like the place where we're living, when we don't like the season we're at in our life. God says to you, don't dwindle away. Do everything you need to do, everything that I've taught you to do to flourish. Turn your heart from an internally focused space to an externally focused space. Turn your heart in a direction that will allow not only you to flourish, but all the people around you to flourish. He says, I want you to pray for that entire city that it would prosper, because as it prospers, so you will prosper. And so these Israelites, cast into exile, far from home, and is surrounded by people that didn't think like them, eat like them, speak like them, do anything like them, God says, I sent you there, and I want you to love where you live. And he speaks the same thing to us if we're in a hard season or in a hard place. And when you do, when you focus your life outward, when you allow yourself to be filled up with the love of God so that you can pour the love of God out on the community around you, not only will the city prosper, but you will prosper too. When we get fixated on our own miserable lives, nothing prospers. Absolutely nothing. If we get fixated on our own prospering, our own welfare, and only our own welfare, then what happens is nothing around us prospers and we dwindle away. We begin to shrink up and feel like we're dying inside. And God says to you, follow me. Follow me into the tough places. Follow me into the beautiful places. Follow me into the spaces where it's dangerous for you to be there, and follow me into the places where you've never felt more safe in your entire life. He says, follow me into conversations with people that are hard to love, and follow me into spaces where you have conversations with people that are really easy for you to love. Follow me into a moment where you extend care to someone who desperately needs it, and follow me into a place and into a community of faith where we can do it together. He says, follow me. And sometimes in order to live that sent life, sometimes in order to follow him, it means that you have to relocate geographically. It's meant that for me sometimes. It's been clear that there's been times in my life where God has said, I want you to go and do something else. He did that when I came here to Life Church Livonia. I've said this before, but I'll be honest. I didn't want to move to Livonia. I didn't even know where it was. I had to look it up on a map when the first time that I heard someone say, hey, we should plant a church in Livonia. I didn't know how to pronounce the city's name, and I had to look it up. And the first time my wife and I drove through the community, we were like, no, thank you. It didn't feel like home. Sometimes we have to move geographically, and then God breaks our heart for that place, that space, those people. But more often than not, I love what Shauna Pilgreen also says about this. She says, it's not that we need to move. We don't necessarily need a geographical relocation. We need a spiritual relocation. It's not that we have to move our physical home. It's we have to relocate the attitude and the position of our heart, of our interior space, of who we are. We have to take ourselves from being centered on ourselves, fixated on ourselves, and turn ourselves to be fixated and centered on the one who gives life and gives it to the full, and soak it in, draw it in, bring it in so deeply, and allow it to become so central and core to who you are that it overflows. That's why we spent 5 weeks, in the last 5 weeks, teaching you that you are the beloved children of God. 5 weeks teaching you how to step into that and to live into that and to soak into that, to allow that to become the center of your very identity, because if you can do that, that's the only way that you'll be able to love where you live. And that's how we have a spiritual relocation. I don't know where you're at today, or what kind of space you find yourself in, whether you resonate deeply with the Israelites who are in exile, or you look around and you think, yeah, everything I've ever wanted is right here. But I want to tell you there's danger in both places. There's danger in both spaces. Because when we are surrounded with everything that we already thought we needed and wanted, we get comfortable and we get complacent. And we're going to talk about that more next week. It's dangerous to be there because we can forget to love where you live, because we only love a very small circle of the community within which we live. And for you, your circle needs to be broadened. And maybe you're resonating deeply with these Israelites who are in exile, and for you, maybe your circle needs to be broadened off of your circumstances and off your own life and onto God. Some of us need a spiritual relocation. I want to invite you into that space, into that place where you give God permission to do what only God can do. And there's a series of kind of next steps that we want to invite you into. And the first is this. If you are here today and you are realizing that I am one of those people who is far from God, I'm one of those people who feels like I don't even know how to have a relationship with God anymore, or I never knew in the first place. The first step I want to invite you to is just take one step closer to God. And at the end of my sermon, I'm going to pray for you and with you, and I just want to invite you to that place. There is no greater life than the life that is lived with Jesus' love at the center. It's the most beautiful thing you could ever commit yourself to. But if you are already a follower of Jesus, I want to encourage you to make a decision today to live a sent life. I want to encourage you to make a decision today to love where you live. And a couple of ways that you can step out in faith with regards to that. You can buy a shirt. We had these shirts made because I don't know if you're like me, but some days I wake up and I forget that this is my job. I'm sure that never happens to you guys. You wake up on fire, on mission every single day. But if you're like me and you need a reminder, buy a shirt. Maybe you need 7. Or 3, so you can rotate them, and not have to wear dirty ones. I don't know. I need to look in the mirror at times and be reminded that my job is to love people where I live. My job is to be filled up with his love so that I can pour it out on other people. Maybe you need to buy a shirt today. They're only $5, and we can take debit cards and just get one. Get one for your family, get one for yourself. If we run out, we'll buy more. This is central to who we are. This is central to how people come to know Jesus at our church. And so maybe one of your next steps is to buy a shirt, but I think for all of us, our next step is to simply pray. Maybe today you need to go to the back, to the prayer area we have back here in this corner, and ask them to pray with you. To say, I'm making a commitment today, and I know that there are things in my life that have been barriers to me living like this, and I need you to walk alongside of me and pray. Come, go, allow them to pray over you and pray with you, pray for you. And then after that, begin to look for opportunities to love people where you live. And the final next step I want to invite you to is to join us in membership at our church. If you're wondering whether or not you're a member, the answer is you're not. None of you are. We've never had formal membership because we're a church plant. We're a church plant that's been growing and creating systems and creating structures. And this summer, we were fully adopted into our denomination as a member church. And as a result of that, now we have paved the way towards a formal process of membership. And for some people, they're thinking, well, why? What's the point? I already come here. I've been coming here for maybe 2 or 3 years. So what is a point of membership? And we're going to talk about that at our membership class in depth. But for today, this is what I want to say to you. Committing to membership at Life Church Livonia says we are committing to do this together. Because this is really hard to do by yourself. It's a system of accountability. It's a construct that allows us to commit not only to God, but to one another, that we are in this together, that we're going to love where we live together, that we're going to walk alongside of one another, that when I'm feeling drained and feel like I need more of the love of God, that I'm going to have people around me that are pouring into me. That when I'm going out and stepping out in faith, that I have someone who will go with me. We need to be together, and membership is a formal way of committing to that and saying, I'm in it with you. I don't want to do this alone. I know that I can't do it alone because my sermons will reach far fewer people than your lives will. What if we committed to doing it together? Right next to where the shirts are at today, where you can buy a shirt, is a spot where you can register for our new member class. It's a Friday night with dinner and then a Saturday morning, and it's not going to be the only time we do this. I want to really encourage you, if you can make the sacrifices to get there, to be there, to do it this time. I would love to have a flood of members. But know that if this time, if you're out of town that weekend or something conflicts with your job or your life, that we're going to do it again. But let's take this opportunity to join in mission together. Before we pray, I want to leave you with a final quote from Henry Nouwen. He says this: God not only says, "You are my beloved," God also asks, "Do you love me?" and offers us countless chances to say yes. I love this. God not only says, "You are my beloved," he also says to us, to you and I, just like he said to Simon, son of John, just like he said to him so long ago, he says, "Do you love me?" And then he gives us countless opportunities to say yes. How will you say yes this week? How will you love where you live? Would you pray with me? Jesus, first I want to start by just praying for the people who are here today who feel far from you. I know what it's like to be in that space where you are unsure and confused and questioning everything, where you are looking at your life and wondering if anything good can come out of it, God. If there are people that are here today, if you're here today and you feel that way, I just invite you right now to come to God and say, "Here I am. I need you to take this life that feels like a mess, this life that feels empty and feels like it's far from you, God, and I want you to draw me to yourself." God, I start by just asking you to forgive me for the way that I have made a mess of it. The ways I've failed, the ways I've struggled, the ways that I've made it about myself. God, I'm sorry for that, and I ask that you'd forgive me. God, I ask you would fill me up. You'd begin to fill me up with your love. You'd fill me up with your grace. You'd fill me up with your truth. And Jesus, for those who are here today and they are ready to be committed, for those who are here today and they're saying, "I feel called to live a sent life," I pray for them today. I pray that to every day, God, that they would hear you ask the question, "Do you love me?" But before they ever hear that question, that they would first hear you speaking over them and saying, "I love you. You are my beloved. You are my son. You are my daughter. You are my cherished people." And then, God, from that space, that they would hear you call them to be sent. God, I pray that they would say yes. I pray that we would love where we live. Amen.